Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Plans to build a new nuclear power station in Cumbria, which would have created more than 20,000 jobs, have collapsed after the Japanese firm Toshiba said it was pulling out of the project. The £15 billion plant would have provided 7% of the UK's future electricity. It's a blow to government plans to replace the UK's coal-fired power stations. From Cumbria, our correspondent Coletta Smith reports.
This should have been the view of the New-Gen power plant in just 6 years' time. But because New-Gen's Japanese owner, Toshiba, have had big financial problems in the States, they've pulled out. Towns along the Lake District's coastline depend on those high-paid nuclear jobs.
3/4 of my customers either work for Sellafield or work for contractors working for Sellafield. If you lose then 1/4 of those because they've either gone into retirement or the jobs have been finished and they've moved out of the area, that's a massive impact on my one shop alone. And the concern for this town, the concern for the whole borough, is how fast can they get it back on the tracks again.
Toshiba have been looking for a buyer for their UK firm for a while, with no luck. Unions say the government should have seen this coming.
The government should be backing us 100% on this. At the end of the day, they have an obligation to make sure this goes ahead. Cumbria is already geared up to have Moorside here. We have some of the best facilities for nuclear training around, and it just feels like it's all going to go to waste. The whole community thrives on the nuclear industry, and it's just shocking how they're being treated.
This is the Sellafield nuclear plant. It's being decommissioned at the moment, so thousands of jobs are in jeopardy over the next couple of years as they scale down the operation. The hope was that they would have been able to move over the road, because this is the new plant that would have been built by Toshiba. The fact that that is now in question puts a lot of concern into this whole area for the future of those jobs. The government had planned for this site to deliver up to 7% of the UK's energy in a decade, but with no one to fund the building of the plant, the future of the UK's power is far from clear.
We know that renewables are now cheaper and quicker than building nuclear plants is, so the government should actually be kick-starting its renewable options rather than trying to keep going down the old failed route of trying to build nuclear power stations at public and taxpayers' expense when there are better options available.
The government say they're committed to nuclear power, but are sticking to the same plan of depending on private companies to build the sites. That means thousands of jobs and the UK's energy future can be buffeted by global headwinds of international companies. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Whitehaven.
Now, the future of a new nuclear power plant in Cumbria, along with 20,000 new jobs, is in doubt after the Japanese engineering giant Toshiba said it was pulling out. The firm made the announcement after 18 months of talks failed to find a new owner for the New-Gen project, which was due to build 3 new reactors. Union leaders described it as depressingly predictable, saying relying on foreign companies for the UK's essential energy needs was irresponsible. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon has this report.
The AP1000 is based on tried and tested technology.
On the Cumbrian coast, the past and the future of nuclear power, side by side. Or at least, that was the plan.
Sellafield was home to the world's first industrial-scale, commercial nuclear power plants. But with old sites being decommissioned, the government's been adamant we need new nuclear plants to help plug the energy gap. The plant that was supposed to be built on these fields was meant to be operational by 2024. We were told it would provide something like 7% of the UK's electricity. Now, who knows?
They've already been drilling and testing here. Construction work on the £15 billion Moorside plant was meant to start this year. Instead, Toshiba is pulling out. And with no takers to take over New-Gen, the company's British nuclear power division, New-Gen and its work at the Cumbrian site are winding up. A few miles away, no sign of much happening at the New-Gen offices today. But in the hall next door, a careers event. 60% of jobs in this area are connected to Sellafield. Almost everyone you talk to has some kind of link to the place. And many tell you something needs to be done to salvage the future of the new site.
Of course I worry about it because all the steelworks, the coal mines over the years, and Sellafields been a good employer, fantastic employer, and we need more work, and we need nuclear power.
Toshiba spent 18 months trying to find a buyer. Where they failed, the area's Tory MP thinks she might succeed. Just back from China, she told me a company there is interested. She says that's the answer, not publicly funded bailouts.
I do want government to invest, but I'm not daft enough to think there's a magic money tree in the Parliament orchard where we can just go and pluck off £20 billion to build this project. Because that would be £20 billion of borrowing, which would mean an extra £20 billion of debt and interest to pay. And ultimately, politicians cannot build nuclear power reactors, so we need to find a credible partner and a serious investor.
Government has an incredible naivety if it thinks that this is something that can be left entirely to the market, because one of the roles of government in a developed society like ours is to ensure that not only are the lights on, but also the economy is powered and all of our industries reliant on electricity are able to function effectively.
The line from the government tonight is that nuclear energy is an essential part of a low-carbon future, but private companies will have to deliver it. For now, at this site at least, how we get to that point is unclear. Claire Fallon, Channel 4 News, in Cumbria.
So where does the withdrawal of Toshiba leave the government's ambitions to expand nuclear power? Economics correspondent Helia Ibrahimi is here. Helia, it's a big problem, isn't it, for the government?
I mean, it's a pretty big problem because we have a very fragile energy supply in this country, and we've had repeated warnings about the lights going off. And as the piece we just heard said, we're on a journey towards carbon-free energy. So coal is out, there are questions over gas. That leaves renewables and it leaves nuclear. And the government has put most of its eggs in the nuclear basket. If we look at the projects around the UK, you have the Toshiba site, which was abandoned. You also have that Hinkley Point EDF site. There are 4 big projects left, and together they're expected to deliver 38% of total electricity demand by 2035. That's double where we are now.
So why is it so difficult to bring those projects online?
Well, nuclear power is both technically difficult and eye-wateringly expensive. Take that Hinkley Point site. It's expected to cost £20 billion, and that doesn't include what the poor consumer will pay through a 35-year guaranteed electricity price. Now, why is this happening? Because the government is trying to be clever and avoid paying money up front. But it ends up getting outmaneuvered by big corporate giants, because the only people who have pockets deep enough are state players in places like China and France. Just last month, Matt, we got a dressing down from the US State Department for cozying up with the Chinese. They've invested in 3 out of 5 of those projects. And the Americans say that they're using civilian schemes to forward their military ambitions.
Right.
And this is a tangled web for UK households.
It is indeed. Helia, thanks very much.
Always controversial, always expensive, the future of nuclear power as a continuing source of our energy looks more precarious tonight. Some of its critics may say that's no bad thing, but the Japanese company Toshiba has pulled out of a contract to build the replacement for Sellafield in Cumbria. That leaves a potential hole in our future energy supply and in the jobs market in that part of the world.
In 1956, the first ever electrons generated by civilian nuclear power got a royal send-off.
It is with pride that I now open Calder Hall, Britain's first atomic power station.
Commercial nuclear reactors born at the Sellafield site were once a very British endeavour.
It's a next-generation power plant. It's already being
But the
built
UK's
in China
current
and the
bid
United
to build
States.
new nuclear plants
When it's
is
built
now
in the
based on
UK, there
attracting
will be the
foreign
7th
investment.
or
The New Gen consortium, backed by Japanese firm Toshiba, was supposed to build new reactors at the Moorside site next door to Sellafield. But today, Toshiba pulled out. These empty fields are a massive setback for the government's plans and the nuclear sector.
It's devastating for our members in Cumbria, but more widely for members who work throughout the nuclear supply chain, including throughout the northwest of England.
The government will face criticism for not creating the right incentives for New Gen. But coinciding with the Fukushima disaster in 2011, there have been doubts about the economics of nuclear power anywhere.
It's obviously disappointing, but I think it was inevitable. Nugen have been beset by problems through no fault of their own. Many of those have been overseas global disasters, Fukushima being one of them. And I think today was something we'd been expecting for a while, actually.
And how much do we need the Moorside plant? Just a few miles offshore of Sellafield is one of the world's largest wind farms. Over the past decade, the UK's energy sector has changed. Only this week it was revealed that renewable generating capacity like wind and solar has overtaken that of fossil fuels for the first time. Both dwarf nuclear capacity, which has reduced over time. From its heyday in 1995, when nuclear was 17% of the UK's generating capacity, it's now down to just 9%. On top of that, we're less power hungry. Compared to 2005, we now use the equivalent of 2.5 nuclear power stations less electricity.
Since 2009, when this station, Moorside, was first proposed, the UK's installed wind power capacity has grown by a factor of 9. The UK's installed solar capacity has grown by a factor of 120. That's where investors are looking. That's the stuff that's easy, nimble, cheap, quick. That's where the money's going.
But it might be very risky to give up our nuclear expertise altogether. By 2030 or so, most of us could be driving electric cars, massively driving up demand. New nuclear may be the best low-carbon technology to fill that gap. Tom Clark, News at 10.